Welcome back to the programming. Continuing on with 1997 dirt sheets, let's jump into April 28, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Vader on Good Morning Kuwait. Kawada wins Carnival. Onita WWF negotiations, more. By Observer staff. Leon White aka Vader found himself in the middle of a strange legal situation somewhat replicating the famous David Schultz and John Stossel incident from 12 years ago while appearing on the television show Good Morning Kuwait. White naturally was in the role of Schultz, the huge bully wrestler, while popular Kuwaiti morning show host Bassem Al-Othman was in the Stossel role, actually with similar hair and mustache. White, 40, was immediately placed under house arrest at his hotel room after the incident, which took place on April 11th, and detained in Kuwait while the rest of the WWF tour returned home 2 days later. White had a hearing in Kuwait on April 22nd and was expected to be cleared to return to the United States the next day. The incident very closely mirrored the Schultz/Stossel incident, which took place in December 1984 in the dressing room in Madison Square Garden and was a large factor in Schultz's wrestling career taking a turn for the worst. Many have speculated the event was a publicity stunt by the WWF to get press coverage. The fact is the incident got a lot of press coverage nationally, much of which mentioned on both its April 20th pay-per-view show and its April 21st Raw television show. The WWF did air clips of the incident on its television over the weekend, although the clips were edited, but news of the incident made newspapers and entertainment papers around the country, generally in the personality or gossip section with humorous overtones, and a clip of the incident aired on Good Morning America on April 18th. The WWF first publicized the incident itself on its 900 line on April 14th, sent out press releases during the week and made Vince McMahon available for interviews regarding the story, which furthered speculation that it was a work to garner the type of gossip column mainstream publicity that WCW has been getting over the past few months with Dennis Rodman and Reggie White. The WWF was tentatively planning to hold a press conference regarding the incident on April 25th, and was working on getting White booked on Good Morning America on that date. Eric Bischoff publicly called the incident a hoax, claiming Titan was doing an angle based on the Stossel/Schultz incident that this closely mirrored. Jim Ross on the WWF hotline, in reference to that, claimed that it was very real and said those who call it a hoax don't know what they're talking about, and said that when people do things that alter their minds it messes up their thinking. USA Today had begun working on a story, which included talking with McMahon, but because the incident may have been a publicity stunt, didn't run the story because the State Department couldn't confirm the incident as legit. Nevertheless, all WWF wrestlers who were both on tour and not on tour were under the impression the incident was legitimate, and front office officials are insistent the original incident itself was not an angle. The original plan for the May 11th pay-per-view show was for Undertaker to headline against Vader, but apparently those plans switched to Undertaker vs. Steve Austin and Vader vs. Ken Shamrock in Shamrock's first WWF match sometime in recent weeks. Without question, since the plan is for a match on May 11th, that WWF would have wanted Vader to shoot an angle with Shamrock either on April 20th at the pay-per-view or on April 21st on the Raw, and his being detained made that an impossibility. Vader was also penciled in on April 18th as Undertaker's opponent for several house show title matches in May, taking the place of Bret Hart, who had to be pulled from those main event matches due to word getting around about his impending surgeries. My personal feeling is that the incident, in regard to the detaining and the arrest, is very real, and the WWF decided several days after the fact to use it to gain as much mainstream publicity as possible. Even though the incident took place on April 11th, word really didn't get out about it until the wrestlers returned home from Kuwait and began telling their friends several days later rather than WWF publicizing it immediately after the arrest took place. The situation went something like this. White and Mark Calloway Undertaker were guests on the live morning television show and were told ahead of time what questions were going to be asked, including whether pro wrestling was fake. According to the Titan side of the story, the English-speaking producer told the wrestlers to ham it up. The question was asked, through an interpreter, to Calloway, who responded with an answer along the lines of being entertainment, but with athleticism, and that the injuries suffered are very real. White wasn't asked the question, but starting off low-key, said he wanted to answer the question and said he's not as diplomatic as his colleague. At that point, White grabbed the host by the tie and began shaking him and said something about the question being bullshit, and in his tirade said he was insulted by the question and shoved the terrified announcer down backward over some chairs and a table, and flower plant wound up being turned over. As the show broke for a commercial, when it came back, both White and Al-Othman were gone, and Al-Othman hasn't been back on the show since. Police were called immediately and White was arrested both for assault and for lascivious conduct because it is illegal in Kuwait to swear on television. There was a second incident involving White, although we're not clear as to the details. It may have been on April 21st, and it was at the hotel White was being detained at, that he caused some sort of a problem that resulted in 20 police officers, people from the U.S. Embassy and his lawyer to have to calm him down. In addition, there was another situation we're not clear of details on that was said to be minor involving him and a flight attendant on the trip to Kuwait. McMahon claimed in press reports that Al Othman had indicated that if he received a $35,000 settlement, that he would drop the assault charges. McMahon said he would have accepted the offer, but then Al Othman disappeared. Complicating matters is this all occurred during Ramadan, the Muslim country's holiest holiday, during which much of the country is undergoing a religious fast period and the legal system is shut down. The word among wrestlers returning from Kuwait was that the host of the show was rich and was offered a settlement by the WWF but had refused. Toshiaki Kawada was the winner of All Japan's 1997 Champion Carnival tournament, coming out on top in only the second gimmick singles match in the 25-year history of the company. Kawada came out the winner of a triangle match with Kenta Kobashi and Mitsuharu Misawa on April 19 at Tokyo's Budokan Hall before an announced sellout of 16,300 fans in what is by tradition the second biggest show of the year, behind only the December Tag Team Tournament Finals. For the company, it was the second time that Kawada has captured the Carnival tournament, having won in 1994 in a famous final match beating Steve Williams. Perhaps more significantly, it was the first time Kawada has ever in his career pinned Misawa in a singles match. With the three wrestlers coming out of the round-robin tied with 19 points, it was announced that the Budokan tournament final would consist of each wrestler having a 30-minute singles match against the other two, and whomever wound up with the best record out of their two matches would be the champion. If the wrestlers were to all split matches, finish 1-1, the Carnival champion would be determined by who scored the fastest victory. It started with Misawa and Kobashi going to a 30-minute draw. The storyline of the match was that Misawa was injured from a previous match against Jun Akiyama. Kobashi dominated the final 2/30 of the match, gaining near falls with at least 2 brainbusters and a DDT. So Misawa went into the match with Kawada exhausted, and Kawada destroyed him early until Misawa hit a Frankensteiner. Misawa had a few flurries during the match, but Kawada dominated, using his stretch plum submission and a powerbomb to gain a pin in 6:09. This left Kawada versus Kobashi, and if Kobashi won, he'd win the Carnival, but all Kawada needed was a 30-minute draw to win. As it was, Kawada pinned Kobashi in 21-27 after a series of high kicks. One would expect this sets Kawada up as the next challenger for Misawa's Triple Crown in the match as the more than likely main event for the June 6 show at Budokan Hall. The final 15 minutes of Misawa Kobashi and the entire Misawa Kawada match aired on television on April 20th, and the Kobashi Kawada match airs on April 27th. Even though the April 20th show was moved due to other programming to the unlikely time slot of 1:40 a.m. on Sunday, it still drew a 3.7 rating, which at that time slot is a 34.2 share. It was only the second gimmick singles match in the history of the traditional promotion, the other being a Texas Death Match in 1974 between Giant Baba and Fritz von Erich. Misawa made it to the finals with a win over Johnny Ace on April 17th in Soka, in which they teased the 30-minute draw by going 26-27 before Misawa scored the pin with a Tiger Driver. Kawada and Kobashi has already clinched spots in the final after wins on April 14th and April 15th respectively. Baba crossed up his pattern booking as many times. All Japan will have a situation where a top name needs a win to make the finals on either the final night or the final round-robin night, only to be held to a 30-minute draw that knocks them out of contention. Final standings were 1. Kawada 10-1-3, 23 points. 2. Kobashi 9-3-2, 20 points, and Misawa 9-3-2, 20 points. 4. Akira Tao 9-3, 18 points, and Stan Hansen 8-2-2, 18 points, and Steve Williams 8-2-2, 18 points. 7. Gary Albright 6-6, 12 points. 8. Johnny Ace 5-7, 10 points, 9. Jun Akiyama 4-7-1, 9 points. 10. Giant Kimala 2-3-9, 6 points. 11. Takao Omori 2-10, 4 points, and Tamon Honda 2-10, 4 points. 13. Jun Izumida 0-14, injury forfeited most of the tournament. Champion Carnival history. 1973, Giant Baba beat Mark Lewin. 1974, Giant Baba beat Mr. Wrestling, Tim Woods. 1975, Giant Baba beat Gene Kinnison. 1976, Abdullah the Butcher beat Giant Baba via DQ. 1977, Giant Baba beat Jumbo Tsuruta. 1978, Giant Baba beat Abdullah the Butcher. 1979, Abdullah the Butcher beat Jumbo Tsuruta. 1980, Jumbo Tsuruta beat Dick Slater. 1981, Giant Baba beat Bruiser Brody. 1982, Giant Baba won. Brody, Tsuruta and Ted DiBiase tied for second. 1983-90 no tournament. 1991, Jumbo Tsuruta beat Stan Hansen. 1992, Stan Hansen beat Mitsuharu Misawa. 1993, Stan Hansen beat Mitsuharu Misawa. 1994, Toshiaki Kawada beat Steve Williams. 1995, Mitsuharu Misawa beat Akira Tao. 1996, Akira Tao beat Steve Williams. Atsushi Onita of the Frontier Martial Arts and Wrestling Promotion in Japan held a press conference on April 16 to announce that they were going to start negotiations with the World Wrestling Federation for a major show in Japan. Full details of exactly what this entails haven't been released, but Onita got the ball rolling when he showed a letter Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard sent in early March where the WWF attempted to open up a business relationship between the two offices. Onita, who along with Wing Kanemura, Yukihiro Kanemura, are scheduled to come to the United States along with FMW booker Victor Quiñones in early May to meet with both WWF officials and perhaps Paul Heyman as well about participating in the show. The meeting is scheduled for May 1st. Although the story has already received significant play in Japan, as best we can tell the only thing definite from a WWF perspective is that they are going to meet with Onita and there have been no talks about anything other than setting up a first meeting. In an unrelated deal, Pritchard and Jim Ross met with the wrestlers from Michinoku Pro Wrestling that appeared on the ECW pay-per-view show on April 21st at the Titan offices in Stamford, Connecticut, about those wrestlers working in the WWF. Reports are that the chances of doing business together appear good at this point and the WWF is planning on starting a lighter weight division but is trying to work out the logistics of when the wrestlers and which wrestlers would be available at certain times. A potential deal with the Michinoku office, provided dates could be adequately worked out, would probably make the WWF's relationship with AAA in Mexico obsolete because the Michinoku wrestlers offer the same type of action but are far more polished workers. Because of the disorganized nature of the AAA office, the WWF has been having problems getting the wrestlers they want on the dates they want, thus unable to give any of the wrestlers any kind of a push or storyline. The April 13th ECW Barely Legal pay-per-view show, besides getting a great response as a show, appears to have done better from a buy rate standpoint than the initial indications last week. Request TV sent out a press release claiming the show would do between 50,000 and 60,000 buys in a 17 million home universe, which would be a buy rate of between 0.29 and 0.35. Multichannel News estimated the buy rate to be 0.26 and 45,000 buys, and other industry sources also estimate the buy rate at between 0.24 and 0.27 but believe the 17 million universe figure is highly inflated and the realistic number of buys is closer to 40,000. I'm skeptical of a 17 million home universe carrying the show as well, since there is a basic rule of thumb within the industry to exaggerate that figure. Recent WWF and WCW pay-per-view shows have had a universe of 26.2 million homes, and if you take away Canada, 4 million homes, Cablevision, 3 million, and half the satellite dish homes that didn't carry ECW, 2 million, that already cuts it down to 17 million. That isn't even taking away the viewer's choice homes which have to run into several million. Others who do pay-per-view shows regularly claim that the total request homes are more like 11 million, and if you add to that 2 million satellite homes and perhaps another million homes that carried the show on a standalone basis, that's only a 14 million total, and that's not taking into consideration that a lot of the Cablevision homes and request homes are the same and those homes weren't able to purchase the show. The general rule within the pay-per-view world is that the figures most companies claim publicly for their shows, not just within the pro wrestling world, are inflated by 20%. For example, the Oscar de la Hoya vs. Pernell Whitaker fight on April 12 that was publicly claimed to have 1 million buys really had closer to 800,000. Paul Heyman said that when he first received the press release, he thought the numbers listed were exaggerated but says he now has been led to believe the show will end up doing in excess of 50,000 buys and at that figure would be a profitable show doing a gross in excess of $400,000. Heyman estimated his expenses on the show at $320,000 to $330,000, so a break-even number would be approximately 40,000 buys. Heyman said the only concession to get requests to carry the show was to guarantee them their share of the money the show would generate on an 0.2 buy rate, which is now a moot point. Because of it being a new player in the marketplace, there was more interest in tracking an accurate buy rate on this show throughout the industry than any show in a long time. In addition, ECW skews considerably higher to insiders, To nobody's surprise, as we received a greater number of responses to the ECW show than to most recent WWF and WCW shows, although the number of responses wasn't as many as the first show of either AAA or UWFI. The show live drew 1,170 paid to the ECW arena, and drew a company all-time record live gate. That figure has been given to me as either a $66,000 or $70,800 house, depending upon whether or not there were 320 or 400 ringside tickets sold at $100, as different company sources have given different numbers. Whatever the real figure is, and really all the estimates are all fairly close, the show did along with lines of what many groups have done for their debut show, so to have the buy rate as anything like a major shock would be overstating things, especially considering that most industry estimates going in were in the 0.2 to 0.3 range. The show did about the same buy rate, perhaps a tad lower, than the debut of both Extreme Fighting and Pancrase, a little higher than the debut and only show of AAA, significantly lower than the debut of UWFI and UFC, and well above the debut shows of martial arts, reality, superfighting and World Combat Championships, let alone the basically forgotten debuts of the Continental Wrestling Federation, or of Abrams' UWF, LPWA and World Fighting Federation. Of those groups, ECW, Abrams, LPWA and AAA were the only ones with any weekly television exposure. ECW is the only one that based its television for weeks around professionally building the pay-per-view as the biggest event in the history of the company. Only one of those groups actually succeeded in pay-per-view to the point it was consistently profitable, which was UFC. It's hard to compare different types of shows, but based on the response we've received, it appears the debut of ECW was better received than most of the above-mentioned groups. The buy rate was certainly strong enough that Viewer's Choice would have no economic reason not to carry the proposed second show on August 17th, which ironically is going to be subject to enormous confusion in the marketplace because the already resurrected Extreme Fighting Championships are scheduled for August 15th. Adding those homes and maintaining a buy rate of better than 0.25 would keep the group consistently profitable in the pay-per-view game. And while most groups declined significantly from the first show to the second, UFC being an exception, ECW did make the most out of its first opportunity, unlike other groups that debuted by throwing a subpar show out there without any long-term purpose or direction to build it to a next show. Overall, by almost any standard, as a first show, it would have to be considered a success. Just 2 days after an official announcement of its folding, the Extreme Fighting Championships claimed to be back in business with an August 15th pay-per-view show scheduled to take place in Davenport, Iowa. Reports are that promoter Donald Zuckerman has found a new, unnamed investor, and has moved the operations out of General Media, Penthouse, in New York, which liquidated the company after a third successive money-losing pay-per-view outing on March 28, to Los Angeles. However, the future of the group looks no more promising. There is the domino effect of cable systems choosing not to carry that type of show that appears is only going to get worse before it gets better, coupled with Request not carrying the August 15th show or any future shows due to the March 28th show doing only an estimated 0.12 buy rate. Without Request, even coming off a very well-received show, whatever slim hope the group has of making a profit on a pay-per-view is out the window, and it'll become just a group constantly looking for the newest money mark to keep it afloat. The one concession to economic reality the next show seems to have is that the previous show supposedly had a $200,000 talent budget, which included $25,000 guarantees for Olympic gold medal wrestlers Kenny Monday and Kevin Jackson, and that with a far less number of homes available, the talent budget would theoretically have to be cut back. There is some question as to what the change in ownership means as far as contracts with fighters. Maurice Smith, EFC's heavyweight champion, had begun negotiating with UFC when it appeared EFC was out the window, and had been talked about as a potential opponent for Mark Coleman for later this year. Talk about the proverbial turning a negative into a positive. The April 21st Raw as War show featured a show-long angle, the highlight of which was Steve Austin injuring Bret Hart, who was taken away in an ambulance. In a twist, Austin was waiting in the ambulance and got some more licks in, with Owen Hart, Davey Boy Smith, Shawn Michaels and Brian Pillman all winding up involved in the angle before the show was over, and it resulted in one of the better episodes of Raw in history. The angle was actually a last-minute decision, probably largely put together on or around April 18th, based on perhaps the worst possible thing that could have happened to the WWF at the present time, a right knee injury requiring surgery that Hart, who has been the key performer in the WWF in recent weeks with his heel turn, actually aggravated while on tour of South Africa and Kuwait. Hart was expected to undergo arthroscopic knee surgery on April 23 in Calgary, and follow it up the next day with surgery on his right wrist. He broke the wrist several years ago and continued working on it, and it never healed properly. He's expected to be out of action about 6 to 8 weeks, which should peg his return at about mid-June. The WWF is hoping for Hart's first match back to be at the June 8 King of the Ring show, although it's too soon to know anything definite. Hart was pulled from the May 11th In Your House pay-per-view. The plan originally was for him to face and likely win the IC title from Rocky Maivia at King of the Ring, although that was before this emergency angle was done and all plans could have changed because of the injury. Hart was also scheduled to headline most of the WWF arena shows over the next few weeks, challenging Undertaker for the WWF title. His spot will be taken, depending upon the city, by either Vader or Davey Boy Smith. Hart decided to work the April 20th pay-per-view as scheduled against Steve Austin and do an angle the next night on Raw to explain his surgery and absence. In the pay-per-view match, Austin used Hart's own sharpshooter on him at the finish, which ended as a DQ due to Owen and Bulldog's interference, but then put the hold back on after the match and Hart had to be helped out of the ring limping. The April 21st Raw saw Hart, who was noticeably limping, which was either selling the injury from the previous night or because the knee was in that much pain by this point, face Austin in a street fight. After Austin was jumped by Owen and Bulldog, who were then chased away by a chair-wielding Michaels, Bret destroyed Austin for a few minutes. Austin made a comeback moving as Bret put his ankle in a chair and was about to come off the top rope on him. Austin pounded Hart with several chair shots to both the knee and the wrist, to explain both injuries, and put the sharpshooter on him and held it for more than a minute. Hart was carried from the ring and they sold it as if he had broken his leg and wrist, and he was put in the ambulance where Austin was hiding. The angle actually began at the start of the show when Austin did the interview challenging Hart to a street fight, and Hart accepted. It continued until the end of the show when Austin did another interview, and was jumped by Owen and Bulldog, which included Owen throwing Vince McMahon to the ground, before Michaels made another save with a chair chasing them both away. At that point, Pillman came out of the stands and attacked Austin with 2 hard chair shots until Michaels made yet another save. In between all this they aired an interview segment where Michaels and Austin argued, trying to get over that they don't like each other, but simply have a common enemy, to explain their eventual tag teaming as they are to challenge Owen and Bulldog for the tag team titles at the King of the Ring if everything continues as planned. The angle was as good as they come with stellar performances by all involved, including little nuances as them rolling the stretcher over a cable cord and having Bret sell it big and Owen scream about it. The angle led to WWF tightening the gap in the ratings this past week, as Nitro drew a 3.39 rating, 2.90 first hour, 3.88 seconds hour, and 5.43 share to Raw's 2.75 first and second hour rating and 4.24 share. The show started out closer than usual with WCW getting a 2.6 for Dean Malenko versus Yuji Nagata and the Glacier angle with Mortis and Brian Clark, while WWF did a 2.4 for Austin's first interview where he challenged Bret to a street fight and the beginning of Ahmed Johnson versus Sultan, while WCW held a 2.9 Nick Patrick interview Ultimo Dragon versus Bobby Eaton, to 2.5 at Edge, Nation of Domination Johnson angle and Ken Shamrock challenge to Tyson. WWF got a rare quarter-hour win with a 3.4 for the Austin-Bret street fight and post-match angle to WCW's 2.8 for Meng versus Chris Jericho. That immediately was turned around with WCW shooting up to 3.3 for Public Enemy versus Steiners with the Conan and Hugh Morris angles to 2.7 for them wheeling Hart around backstage and Tiger Ali Singh versus Sal Sincere. The biggest gap of the night was the sixth quarter as WCW drew a 4.1 for Jeff Jarrett versus Scotty Riggs and 6 versus Rey Mysterio Jr. for the Cruiser belt, while WWF fell to 2.4 for the ending of Rockabilly versus Jesse James, Austin and Shawn Michaels arguing backstage and Mankind's interview. Actually, the fifth quarter was notable because WCW did a 4.0 rating with no Wrestling 8 confrontation between J.J. Dillon and Eric Bischoff, against a 2.5 for the first part of Rockabilly vs. James, although given what WWF had on at that time, it was somewhat understandable. However, after WCW seemed to turn it around, WWF mounted a slight comeback although still losing the seventh quarter. Hogan Video, NWO and Nash interview versus first half of Undertaker vs. Helmsley, to a 3.9 to 2.9, but WWF closed a gap in the final segment. Paige Psychosis and Flair Piper Green interview and NWO confrontation versus ending and post-match Undertaker Helmsley and Austin interview where Owen, Bulldog, Michaels and Pillman got involved to a 3.5 to 3.2 deficit. The Nitro replay drew a phenomenal 1.9 rating and 4.5 share, which may have been the all-time record, which seems to indicate whatever percentage Nitro lost was more due to WWF being good than a lack of interest in Nitro. The hot show was important because we are going into May sweeps, where the cable network ad rates are determined by primetime ratings, become doubly important. Because of the NBA playoffs, Nitro is being moved starting April 28th to a 1-hour format starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, which means Raw will be going unopposed through May 19th and thus has a chance to do consistent 3.0 plus ratings, and Raw should win the next 4 weeks. Last year during the playoffs, the Raw ratings beat the Nitro ratings by sizable margins every week, causing people to believe some sort of momentum was being built, but it was all illusory, as once the playoffs were over, Nitro has beaten Raw in the ratings every week but one. Raw certainly overshadowed the final pay-per-view in a 6-week run with a show every weekend. The April 20th show from the Rochester War Memorial Auditorium, entitled Taker's Revenge, was a largely forgettable show with 2 strong main event matches and a total nothing undercard. The plethora of DQ finishes, 3 and 5 pay-per-view matches, run-ins and ref bumps was only made worse by a DQ finish in the Bret Hart vs. Austin main event. In addition, the mystery surprise protege of Honky Tonk Man turned out to be Billy Gunn, renamed Rockabilly, which caused the crowd to either go into a temporary coma or flock to the bathroom and basically put the final nail in the undercard's coffin. Even with the final 2 strong matches, the screw-job-laden booking and disappointment of a surprise made this a slight thumbs-down show. It does continue the competitive situation with WCW in that WCW has the far stronger undercards and WWF has far stronger main event matches on pay-per-view. The show drew a sellout 6,477, paying $87,414, selling out 5 days beforehand, again showing just how hot pro wrestling is these days, and drawing the largest gate in the history of pro wrestling in Rochester. Sultan Solofa Fatu pinned Flash Funk, Charles Skaggs, in 2:55 when Funk went for a Frankensteiner off the top rope, but Sultan caught him and dropped him into a power bomb from the middle rope. Too short to amount to anything. 1/4 of 1 star. 1. Legion of Doom, Mike Hagstrand and Joe Laurinaitis beat WWF Tag Team Champions Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith via DQ in 10-11. They did an apparent title switch at 6:54 with Animal pinning Smith after a power slam off the middle rope. The ref counted the fall and the load was announced as the new champions. A second ref came in and explained that Smith wasn't the legal man in the ring, and the match was restarted. The restart session went 3:17 with the load doing the double impact on Hart and Hawk had him pinned. In a clumsy finish, Bret Hart started his run-in a little late, as the ref had to count 2 and be coming down for 3 when Bret kicked Hawk for the DQ, which is what happened. The problem is the ref waited several seconds to start his count, which looked stupid, because he alertly saw Bret was never going to make it in the ring in time. 3/4 of a star. 2. Savio Vega, Juan Rivera, beat Rocky Maivia, Dwayne Johnson, via count-out, so Maivia retained the IC title in 8:33. Most of this match was a backdrop for Farouk to do color and explain the stipulations for the 1-on-3 deal with Ahmed Johnson on the next pay-per-view. So naturally Farouk's headset didn't work, and it wasn't until Jim Ross gave up his that he could get started. Actually, this match wasn't nearly as good as their match in South Africa. Maivia got near falls with a belly-to-belly suplex, a urinage and a backslide. He missed a shoulder block and flew out of the ring, crashing into Crush, who was at ringside. Crush gave Maivia the heart punch but just let him lay there to be counted out, rather than throwing him back in the ring to be pinned. After the match, Vega and Crush started arguing since Vega was mad about the count-out. Farouk got in the ring and calmed the two down, and the entire nation attacked Maivia until Ahmed Johnson showed up with his 2x4 for the save. 3/4 of a star. 3. Jesse Jean Brian James pinned Rockabilly, Monisop, in 6:46. The place died when Billy Gunn came out as Honky's mystery protege, as it was a huge letdown. Match had no heat at all. Jean won with a small package. Honky tried to hit Jean with his guitar after the match, but Jean got out of the way. 1/4 of 1 star. 4. Undertaker Mark Calloway pinned Mankind, Michael Foley, in 17:26 to retain the WWF title. Really good, largely due to the performance of Mankind, who took some hard bumps and took his key bump at the perfect time. Mankind was whipped into the guard rail twice and over the rail. Undertaker smashed his head into the rail. Undertaker used a rope walk and clothesline. Undertaker teased doing the tombstone, but dropped Mankind to go after Paul Bearer. Mankind got the urn and hit Undertaker with it for a good near fall. Undertaker took over, smashing Mankind's head into the steps. Mankind got the water pitcher from Vince McMahon's desk and broke it over Undertaker's head and followed with a hard chair shot. It was pretty clear they were going for hardware juice, but either Undertaker didn't end up being cut, or if he did, it wasn't noticeable on television, although the announcers did say there was a cut. Mankind dropped the elbow off the middle rope to the floor and Undertaker's bandage cut off his face, revealing an ugly scab from the fire angle. Mankind used 2 pile drivers, but Undertaker got up and Mankind pulled the ref in front of him for a bump. Mankind got the mandible claw on, but no ref. When the second ref came in, Mankind put him in the mandible claw. Bearer threw in a chair and Mankind threw the ring steps into the ring. As Mankind was about to hit Undertaker with the steps, Undertaker got up and gave a sloppy dropkick to the steps which hit Mankind in the head. Mankind took the bump where he wound up hung in the ropes, which is the spot where he lost his ear in the first place. Undertaker pulled off his mask, revealing, well, we all know who he is. Undertaker then hit Mankind with the ring steps and he took this incredible header bump through the Spanish announcer's table. As he got back in the ring, Undertaker got a near fall with a choke slam before putting him away with the tombstone. After the match, Undertaker chased Bearer into the ring. I think Undertaker actually had to run backwards to avoid catching the speedster Bearer in an attempted full sprint. It appeared the idea was for Mankind to throw fire at Undertaker, who would pull Bearer in the way and he'd get burned. They set the spot up twice, but both times Mankind's lighter didn't work, and they blew the spot. At this point it was all impromptu time as Undertaker made a comeback and got the lighter and the flash paper and wound up throwing the fire at Bearer's face. 3 3/4 stars. 5. Steve Austin Steve Williams beat Bret Hart via DQ in 21:09. A very good match, but not on the level of their previous 2 pay-per-view matches. Austin destroyed Hart early until another ref bump. Hart got a chair and used it on Austin's bad knee 5 times and did the figure 4 around the post. Hart gave 3 more chair shots to the knee, but Austin got up and actually made a comeback without selling the knee hardly at all. Hart removed Austin's knee brace, but Austin hit a low blow and a leg drop to the groin. However, Hart was quickly back on top using a figure 4, which Austin reversed. Austin backdropped Hart over the guardrail and cut open his left elbow. They brawled around ringside with Austin dropping Hart on the guardrail and clotheslining him off the apron. Austin tried a piledriver but his knee gave out. Austin went for the Stone Cold Stunner but Hart blocked it holding onto the ropes. Hart came back with a low blow. This match didn't have nearly the heat you'd think it would have for a well-worked match in such a hot feud. Hart used a superplex off the top rope and went for the sharpshooter, but Austin hit Hart in the knee with his knee brace that was on the mat. Austin put the sharpshooter on Hart when Owen and Bulldog came out. Austin decked both, and got the hold on again. Finally Bulldog hit Austin with a chair for the DQ finish. After the match Bret went to attack Austin with the ring bell, but Austin beat him to the punch with a chair shot to the knee and put the sharpshooter on once again and held it until Owen and Bulldog knocked him out of the ring with Hart selling the knee big at the finish. 3 3/4 stars. New Japan completed the lineup for its May 3rd Osaka Dome show by announcing 5 more matches this past week. The bouts announced are Antonio Inoki and Tiger King, Satoru Sayama versus Yoshiaki Fujiwara, Inoki's favorite opponent, and Jushin Liger Tatsumi Fujinami versus Hiroyoshi Tenzan, Steiner Brothers and Keiji Muto versus Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and Masahiro Chono, Lex Luger and the Giant versus Marcus Bagwell and Scott Norton and Tadao Yasuda and Junji Hirata versus NWO Sting and 6. Sting was originally to appear on the show but that had to be scrapped because the show would interfere with his commitments as he's currently filming a movie in Atlanta, which is why he was absent from Nitro this week. Already announced last week and completing the show are the IWGP Heavyweight title match with Shinya Hashimoto versus Naoya Ogawa, Riki Choshu and Kensuke Sasaki defending the IWGP Tag Team titles against Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi. Tokumitsu Ishizawa returning to New Japan against Kazuo Yamazaki, Shiro Koshinaka versus Kengo Kimura in a grudge match, and the 10-man junior heavyweight tag match with April 6th All Japan. 1. Hayabusa and Tornado beat Mossman and Shiga in 1646 when Hayabusa pinned Shiga with a Firebird Splash, which is the same thing as a Scorpio Splash. Hayabusa did a few nice springboard moves in his All Japan debut and overall looked okay. Second half of the match only on TV. 2 stars. 2. Kobashi pinned Akiyama in 2013. The two traded moves and cutting each other off in an excellent match. The match worked well in that the idea is for Akiyama to gain enough momentum that the crowd believes he's going to pull the upset, and they did since they popped big as he had Kobashi on the verge of losing. A few new moves were thrown in along with all of Akiyama's trademark moves. Kobashi did a half Nelson into a German suplex for a near fall. Akiyama debuted a move that starts as a back suplex and ends as a power bomb. Kobashi debuted a combination hammerlock and DDT. In between, Akiyama got several near falls with his exploder suplex. Kobashi got 2 near falls with power bombs, and after a couple of reversals, hit a lariat for the fall. 4 stars 1/4. April 13th, New Japan. This was the Tokyo Dome show. Rated on the standards of a pay-per-view show, based on what aired on television, it would be a thumbs-down show, or maybe thumbs in the middle but leaning down. As mentioned, every time there's a show in the Dome, it's probably the worst building to watch a show in anywhere because noise travels so badly. It's hard for the crowd to get into the match because they can't hear the ring noise, and really can't see the wrestlers except by watching the big television screens. It's hard for the wrestlers because they can't hear the crowd to work them. Nevertheless, there have been great Dome shows in the past, but this wasn't one of them. There were a ton of people in the building, but based on crowd reactions, or lack thereof in certain spots, the show was more heavily papered than most, if not all past Dome shows. Actually, that was known beforehand, but the crowd reactions were another confirmation in that there were signature spots that the regular fans would know that didn't seem to register like they usually do. Dome has something to do with it anyway. So all the matches would have been better in another setting. 1. Antonio Inoki beat Tiger King, Satoru Sayama, in 6:46. Inoki is still the most over wrestler on the planet and physically looks incredible for 54 years of age. His face is starting to show the years, but his body looks the same. Sayama still has the world-class quickness and reflexes. They worked this to look like a shoot, so it was interesting to watch throughout, but the finish with Inoki catching the abdominal stretch came out of nowhere and wasn't a good climax to the match. Inoki didn't do anything, but still looked good for his age. 1 star. 2. Jushin Liger retained the J Crown, pinning Great Sasuke in 2008. About half the match aired on television, and it was the best on the show. Sasuke did an Osai moonsault in the first minute, crashing onto the press table. He also did a Sasuke special, Space Flying Tiger Drop, and his Crazy Rider kick. Liger did a plancha and a rolling body block off the apron. Liger used a Fisherman Buster, a Brain Buster, and a Frog Splash off the top for near falls. After missing a Frankensteiner off the top, Sasuke came back with a knee drop off the top. Sasuke missed a combination moonsault into a Scorpio Splash, which would have been incredible had he hit it, allowing Liger to take control. Liger hit a palm thrust followed by a Liger bomb before getting the pin with a Brain Buster off the top rope. This match probably would have had incredible heat and been well in the 4.5 stars range in another building, but the dead atmosphere hurt it. 3 3/4 stars. 3. Great Muta pinned Masahiro Chono in 1409. This was also edited. At one point Muta got the spray can from Chono and spray painted NWO on his back, and then blew black mist over the NWO spray. It was the slow-moving Muta style, which made for something of a dead match. Chono used a low blow and Yakuza kick, the same finishing sequence of their previous match on March 25th, but Muta kicked out and the crowd really didn't pop as you'd expect for it. Muta came back dropkicking Chono off the top rope to where he hit his head on the table he'd brought in the ring, then got the pin with a moonsault. After the match, Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito attacked Muta, but he cleaned house on both of them, and then offered his hand to Chono. Chono shook the hand and Muta rolled out of the ring. 1 1/2 star. 4. Riki Choshu and Kensuke Sasaki won the IWGP Tag Team titles, beating Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura in 15:35. Again, this was edited on television. Finish saw Kimura pinned after receiving lariat after lariat from both men. It was okay. 2 1/4 stars. 5. Naoya Ogawa beat Shinya Hashimoto in 9:25. Since the object of the match was to look like a shoot because it was billed as a mixed martial arts match, it was good for what it was. Ogawa was smooth at everything he did, never blew up and sold Hashimoto's offense in a believable way. He was in no way the level of Jun Akiyama when he debuted, but did a very good job for a first match. This wasn't as good as the Lawrence Taylor vs. Bam Bam Bigelow match, although it couldn't have been since it had to look realistic, but Ogawa looked to have tons more potential as a wrestler than Taylor did. Mainly they did takedowns and attempted submissions, while Hashimoto tried kicks and chops. Hashimoto got a bloody nose. Finish was Ogawa using the SDO, which is kind of a leg sweep forward takedown in judo, and clamped on the choke sleeper and body scissors, and ref Masao Hattori immediately stopped the match. 2 1/4 stars. Puerto Rico. Carlos Colon regained the held-up Universal title, beating Jim Steele on April 5th in Caguas. Colon had the figure 4 on when manager Rico Suave hit Colon with a 2x4, and Steele reversed the figure 4. At this point Pablo Marquez hit the ring and attacked Suave, with the ref distracted by that brawl. Ray Gonzalez then hit the ring with a 2x4 and hit Steele with it, knocking him out, and Coleman pinned him. In addition, Alex G beat Chuck Singer on April 9th to win the American lightweight title with a similar finish. This time it was Skull Von Crush who attacked G and put Singer on top after a ref bump, but before the ref recovered, Marquez ran in and powerbombed Singer and put G on top. New to the area is Brett Sanders from Windy City Wrestling and Victor the Bodyguard, Victor Rodriguez. The biggest show of the past weekend was April 19th in Kuwait with Coleman vs. Steele with the figure 4 against the powerbomb, Invader No. 1 vs. Chicky Star with the ring surrounded by nails, and Gonzalez defending the Puerto Rican title against Huracan Castillo plus Marquez and Ricky Santana vs. Singer and Sanders. The Bushwhackers appeared at the April 9th TV tapings beating Doink the Clown, Ray Apollo, and John Savage, who is related to WCW's Barbarian, I believe a younger brother, and also beat Von Crush in the Latin Freebird. The TV main event was Invader No. 1 vs. Star in a cage match when saw Victor knock out the ref and get in the cage and lock the door, and he and Star destroyed Invader. Mexico. We don't have much in the way of news from the past week. EMLO ran a special show to commemorate the 41st anniversary of pro wrestling on April 18th at Arena Mexico and changed its world heavyweight title in the main event. The Steel, Sean Morley, captured the belt beating Rayo de Jalisco Jr. with a double reversal. As he went for a power bomb, Rayo reversed it into a Hurricane Rana, and Steele reversed it into a sunset flip and scored a clean third fall pin. Got to see some tapes of Steele. He wears a mask and has a good physique. I wouldn't compare him to Lex Luger, although he kind of moves similar to Luger at the same stage, although he's got way more potential as an athlete and a worker, but physique is more along with lines of a jungle Jim Steele or a renegade jacked up and in shape. Definite potential, but he's green right now, and does a great splash off the top. Also on the show they did a 16-man elimination Survivor Series style match loading up all the great workers and giving them a long time. That was Shocker and Negro Casas and Dandy and Atlantis and Ultimo Dragon and Brazo de Oro and La Fiera and Mascara Magica versus Kevin Quinn and Scorpio Jr. and Felino and Black Warrior and El Satanico and El Io del Santo and Silver King and Dr. Wagner Jr. It was a total psychology reversal that would never be tried in the US, as it wound up with a heel Felino left with 4 babyfaces, Fiera, Atlantis, Magica, and Dragon, and he ran the gauntlet, so to speak, pinning all of them clean in the middle in succession, finishing off by beating Dragon with Dragon's own La Magistral finisher. Felino was crying in his post-match interview as he was presented with a trophy for winning the tourney, which will likely set up Felino as a challenger for Dragon's NWA middleweight title. Dragon has held the NWA middleweight belt for a long time and it was somewhat forgotten, so during that period when he held the WCW Cruiser belt and the J Crown, he actually held 10 belts, not 9, which has to be some kind of a record. They continued regular feuds such as having Fiera pin Silver King and Casas and Santo both get eliminated by being DQ'd against one another. The match was said to have been great and the Rayo Steel match was said to have been better than it sounds on paper, as Rayo, who sucks, worked hard. AAA did a television taping on April 18th in Tijuana which drew another sellout of 6,000 with a main event of Cibernetico and Pero Aguayo, and Connect beating Jake Roberts and Pierroth Jr. and Killer via DQ. Reports are that Roberts looked like he was 100 years old in the ring and was blown up within minutes. Match was said to have been really bad. The Minis stole the show and were super over with incredible heat as Mini Vader and Mini Mankind and Mini Goldust beat Mascara de Sagrada Jr. and the new Octagonchito and La Parquita. The other top match saw Latin Lover and Hector Garza and Leon Negro beat Schizophrenia, Don't Know Who, and Jerry Estrada and Abismo Negro in a very good match. Promo Azteca returns to Tijuana on May 2nd with Vampiro Canadiense, Zapatista, Zorro and Fantasma on the show. Benjamin Mora runs a show on May 16th in Tijuana with a Hair and Mask vs. Hair and Mask match with Rey Mysterio and El Io del Santo vs. Negro Casas and Misterioso. This is actually a pretty big deal in that Misterioso was originally going to lose his mask to Rey Mysterio Jr. on an outdoor show for Promo Azteca. However, due to the problems with Scott Hall being unavailable, the outdoor show has been postponed several times, and I guess Misterioso was offered less money by Mora but convinced that the other show wasn't ever going to take place, and this was the result. It's interesting also to see, after years of build-up at Arena Mexico with Santo versus Casas, that Casas would instead lose his hair in Tijuana before a smaller crowd than the two would draw in Arena Mexico. Promo Azteca ran April 11th in Tijuana, drawing 1,800 as Angel Azteca and Lizmark Jr. and Rey Mysterio Jr., subbing for Conan, showing up wearing street clothes including a Four Horsemen t-shirt, wrestled Psicosis and Pirata Morgan and Villano 3. Conan is still wearing NWO outfits to the ring in his matches in Mexico City, but doesn't wear his American ring outfit and instead wrestles in the Mexico City tie-dyed costume. Black Warrior is expected to feud with Lizmark Jr. in Promo Azteca when he comes aboard, which may be on April 26, although he still worked on April 18 at Arena Mexico. Besides Tijuana, the AAA business is said to have really picked up in the past few weeks. There are two major lawsuits that will perhaps have decisions over the next few weeks that could shape the future of wrestling regarding the contracts of the original minis, like the original Mascarada Sagrada and Octagon Cheeto, and also the La Parka name. AAA ran a few angles at other shows over the past week plus. I guess to get things straight with WWF, they had a minis match where Mini Vader and Mini the Killer and Mini Goldust faced Mascarada Sagrada Jr. and New Octagon Cheeto and La Parquita. It wound up with Mexican Paul, Mini Paul Bearer, coming out and hitting Mini Goldust with a mini urn by accident. Mini Goldust then turned on Mexican Paul until both Mini Vader and Mini Mankind joined Paul in destroying Mini Goldust for his babyface turn. In another match, Los Payasos faced Mascara Sagrada Jr. and La Parka Jr. and Canek. Payasos' manager turned on them and took off his payaso mask to reveal another clown mask of Super Muñeco, so Muñeco is now back in a clown versus clown feud with Los Payasos. Picudo and My Flowers and Jerry Estrada and Crazy 33 are being put together as a regular foursome wearing Doing a Kiss, rock band, not the 70s wrestler, gimmick with the rock makeup and feuding with the Love Machines, Heavy Metal and Hector Garza and Latin Lover. Promo Azteca taping on April 18 in Mexico City was headlined by Mascara Sagrada and Lizmark Jr. and Zorro vs. Cien Caras and Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000. Conan is now producing the Azteca television shows and the change is noticeable. He's trying out a lot of new ideas, which based on the response we've heard, didn't come off that great. What he did this past week was have the main event, which was Mascara Sagrada and La Parka and Vampiro vs. Los Hermanos Dinamita, and opened the show airing the first fall, aired the second fall midway through the show, and ended the show airing the third fall, but didn't air the finish of the third fall, saving that for the beginning of next week's show. All the bumpers were changed from wrestling clips to clips of women in bikinis. Anyway, we heard that it was impossible to get into the flow of the main event because of the lengthy breaks and airing other matches between falls. The wrestler Scarecrow in AAA, used to be known as Voladores, has been out of action for a long time after a serious auto accident. All Japan. Not much aside from the Carnival news. The next tour will be from May 17 to June 6 with the final show at Budokan Hall. In the top matches at Budokan Hall on April 19, besides the Carnival Triangle, Gary Albright and Takao Mori and Stan Hansen beat Steve Williams and Johnny Ace and Johnny Smith when Albright pinned Smith with a dragon suplex, and Yoshinari Ogawa and Kentaro Shiga beat Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Hayabusa from FMW. How's this for a first? They are now selling Joe Higuchi t-shirts at the matches commemorating his 32 years as a referee. They had a retirement ceremony in the ring at the Budokan show for Higuchi, and appearing at the show was Akebono, the sumo wrestling grand champion, who is probably one of the 2 or 3 biggest sports celebrities in the country right now. New Japan. They opened the new tour on April 17 in Nagasaki before a sellout 2,400. This is a minor tour with no foreign talent and no title matches, so as not to detract from promoting the Osaka Dome show. In addition, Masahiro Chono is on a 1-month vacation in the United States, so he's not on tour, nor is Shinya Hashimoto doing the gimmick where he's in seclusion training for his title defense on the May 3rd show. They've put some focus on Manabu Nakanishi and Satoshi Kojima as a tag team since they're getting a title shot at the Dome, as they beat Keiji Muto and Junji Hirata on April 17, but surprisingly lost to Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito on April 19 in Kaori. The actual rating for the April 13 television show was a 10.5. The 13.0 rating we listed last week was the Nielsen rating, but Video Research is considered the primary rating service in Japan, so that's the figure everyone goes by. What that means is that the overall rating for the show was slightly lower than the ratings for some of the recent Dome shows, although it is still a good rating. Most reports indicate that the Dome crowd was closer to 50,000 than the announced 60,500, although given how slow tickets were moving early, it is considered a successful show. Among those in attendance at the Dome show were K1 promoter Kazuo Ishii and star kickboxer Andy Hug. Other Japan notes. Japanese media reports indicate that the Tokyo Dome show with the Hickson Gracie vs. Nobuhiko Okada match is now being talked about for August 15. At press time, the only thing we've heard about the ring's April 22 show in Osaka is that Fulk-Han beat Akira Maeda by submission at 8:47, so Han retains his top ranking in the promotion. Abdullah the Butcher makes his debut for War on May 5 at Korakuen Hall, teaming with Tarzan Goto and Ryo Miyake against Genichiro Tenryu and Koki Kitahara and Jun Kikuchi in a cage match. The tour goes through May 10 with Butcher and Tenryu on opposite sides of tag team and trios matches in every main event. Tenryu's longtime tag team partner Ashura Hara will make a guest appearance at the June 6 Korakuen Hall show, doing a conda with the fans. Hara retired nearly 3 years ago. Former UFC fighter Joel Sutton, 27, from Buffalo, New York, will oppose Minoru Suzuki in his comeback match on the May 24 Pancrase show in Kobe. Sutton is 2-0 in alternate matches on UFC shows, including a memorable bloodbath match stopped by the referee where he beat pro wrestler Geza Coleman Jr. Basically, Sutton, who has limited ground wrestling experience, is being given the chance because he took care of Yoshiki Takahashi as far as helping him set up training when Takahashi was in Buffalo for the UFC. Atsushi Onita wrestled on April 19 in Ikeda before a sellout 2000 in a street fight match with Masato Tanaka and Tetsuhiro Kuroda against Mr. Ganasuke and Hisakatsu Oya and the Gladiator. Mainly this was to do an angle to start building up heat for the April 29 Yokohama Arena show. They had a wild match using chairs, tables and sticks, and Gladiator hung Onita with a rope. Ganasuke ended up throwing a fireball at Kuroda and Gladiator pinned Kuroda after a powerbomb. After the match, the Headhunters attacked Onita, but Wing Kanemura and Hideki Hasaka made the save for Onita to set up Onita and Kanemura teaming together on the April 29 show. After the match, Onita was on the house mic saying that he would team with Kanemura on April 29, but that he later wanted a singles match with him. FMW had run April 18 at Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2,150, putting a women's match between Megumi Kudo and JWP's Mayumi Ozaki in a no-rope barbed wire barricade double hell death match as the main event. Kudo won the double juice match. The match with Kudo vs Shark Tsuchiya is being billed as the main event for April 29 since it is Kudo's retirement match. Kiyoshi Miki Ibaragi, a former magazine reporter who helped start FMW and later Wing, announced on April 17 that he is reforming the Wing promotion as a Lucha Libre office working with AAA. Ibaragi has a bad rep in Japan for starting companies, running shows, and then not paying his bills and disappearing. This will be the 4th time he's started this company, and working with AAA with their organization doesn't sound like a great recipe either. Wing, which gained a cult following in Japan as an ECW-like promotion with the wild brawling and death matches, is abandoning that style for a strict lucha style on this rebirth, which should be in June, with Heavy Metal and Venom being brought in as the top names for the first tour, which by themselves are hardly going to be major ticket sellers. JD Promotions ran the biggest show in its short history on April 20 at Korakuen Hall, drawing a sellout 2,205 for the Lioness Asuka vs soon-to-be retiring Bison Kimura TWF title match won by Asuka in 32-34. Also on the show, Megumi Yabushita, who was World Judo Champion in her weight class in 1995, made her pro wrestling debut beating Sumi Sakai in a judo-style bout. To show how things change, All Japan Women ran an afternoon show in the same building and only drew about 1,400 fans, with the surprise result of Takako Inoue pinning Kaoru Ito in the main event. Surprising result since Ito is challenging Kyoko Inoue for the Triple Crown on the next major show on May 11 in Nagoya. Kingdom Promotions announced its first show on May 4 at Yoyogi Gym in Tokyo. Not really much of a show as Yoji Anjo vs Masahito Kakihara headlines and Nobuhiko Takata faces rookie Rui Kamiyama. The big push seems to be bringing in a man named Caribou Mandaingo, who is said to be 6'4", 242 with a 21-3-1 record in kickboxing, to face Yoshihiro Takayama. Hayabusa will be working the Michinoku Pro Show on May 3 because so many of the Michinoku wrestlers will be working the Osaka Dome that day. Hiromichi Fuyuki's Fuyuki Gun promotion ran its first show on April 19 in Gifu before an announced sellout of 2,850, where Fuyuki and Geto and Jado keeping the world's 6-man street fight FMW version, belts beating Super Leather Mike Kirchner, and Crypt Keeper Jose Estrada Jr., and Flying Kid Ichihara. Fuyuki's show also included wrestlers from besides FMW, also JD and All Japan Women. Ryumago's Samurai Project under new financing debuted on April 16 at Korakuen Hall before an estimated 1,000. The only foreigners on the show were Jesse Barr and Tiger Jeet Singh. Singh in the ring talked about how his son had just won the Kuwaiti Cup and said that his son had signed a 14-year contract with the WWF. Don't know if there's any truth to that, but it sure sounds absolutely insane on the surface. AJW May 11 at Nagoya. Besides Kyoko vs Ito for the Women's Triple Crown is building around the reformation of two legendary tag teams. In a non-title match, Manami Toyota, who has been out of action with a blown-out knee this week, and Toshio Yamada team up against current WWA Tag Champs Kumiko Maekawa and Tomoko Watanabe. Also, for likely the last time, Asia Kong teamed with Bison Kimura to reform the Jungle Jacks, the top heel team in the promotion 7 years back, to face Takako Inoue and Yumiko Hata. In addition, Mima Shimoda and Atsuko Mita reformed their team against Genki Misae and Yuka Shina. The newest Tiger Mask from Michinoku Pro was back in action this week after being out a few months with a knee injury. USWA. It was pretty evident that Dutch Mantel had taken over the book for the television on April 19th. They brought in Michael St. John to co-host the show with Lance Russell, and Mantel, who turned himself heel, kept interrupting, saying that the show needs 3 smart announcers. He said that St. John was smart, Russell was smart, but Stacy didn't have a clue. The Shooting Stars, who hold the USWA tag titles, are Jerry Faith and Troy Haste, who are 2 wrestlers who have been affiliated with Mike Samples for several years. Apparently the paid attendance at the April 12th show in Memphis was down to 210. There was no card this week, but they'll be back on April 27th with King Reginald defending the unified title against Jerry Lawler on top. Here and there. Mitsu Arakawa, one of the top salt-throwing stereotypical Japanese heels of the 60s, passed away in his sleep on April 17th from an apparent heart attack. Arakawa, 72, had been in poor health the past few years and was living in Concord, CA. Arakawa wrestled Bill Melby in the main event on Roy Shire's first pro wrestling card at the Cow Palace in San Francisco in 1960, which drew what at the time was the largest crowd ever to witness an event in the building, a sellout in excess of 16,000, which is still the largest wrestling crowd in the building that wasn't headlined by Ray Stevens, and a gate of $48,000, which were almost unheard of figures at that time. He later formed a tag team with Kinji Shibuya and held the West Coast version of the World Tag Team titles, beating Guy and Joe Bernetti on November 11, 1961 at the Cow Palace, and held the belts until November 10, 1962 when they lost them to Nick Bockwinkel and Wilbur Snyder. He also formed a tag team with Dr. Moto, Tor Kamada, and held the AWA Tag Team titles for more than 1 year, beating Pat O'Connor and Wilbur Snyder on December 2, 1967 in Chicago before losing both the WWA and AWA versions of the tag title simultaneously to Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher on December 28, 1968, also in Chicago. He and Moto also held the Indiana version of the World Tag Team titles twice with Dr. Moto, Tor Kamada, at roughly the same period, first beating Bruiser and Crusher on October 13, 1967 before losing to Snyder and O'Connor on September 24, 1968 in Indianapolis. They regained the belts on October 26, 1968 in Elkhart, Indiana before the match where they lost both sets of belts in Chicago. He continued to wrestle through the mid-70s with a variety of Japanese partners, perhaps his last one being Yoshino Sato in the Detroit promotion, who is now better known as the Great Kabuki. Disco Inferno, Glenn Gilberti, said that reports here and elsewhere that he wasn't taking any indie bookings after July 1st and that he was going to WWF are false. He said that he's never talked with anyone from WWF about going there, nor indicated at any time to anyone that he was going to WWF. Big Time Wrestling on May 16th in Fremont, California at Washington High will be having a tribute to Ray Stevens, with Iron Sheik, Fatu and Salvatore Sincere all booked. Appearing as guests at the show are scheduled to be Pepper Gomez and Paul DeMarco. Paul Buntello, who has been doing USWF for Steve Nelson, won a Tough Man contest on April 19th in Amarillo to win a $1,000 purse. Several of the wrestlers who worked for Nelson on April 12th were also on this show, including Lisa Hunt, who earned $500 winning the women's tournament after winning her shoot fight match the previous week. In going to the finals and losing in the shoot fight heavyweight tournament and winning this tournament, Buntello fought 6 different fights over 2 weekends. David Davis appeared in both tournaments as well and also wound up fighting 6 different fights over the 2 weekends. There's a weekly pro wrestling talk show on WIXC 1360 AM in Pittsburgh hosted by Norm Connors from 6:30 to 7 p.m. every Saturday night, running down both the major offices and local shows. World Pro Wrestling on April 27th in Somerville, Massachusetts at Anthony's will have Dan Severn, Rick Martel, Nails and Johnny Smith appearing. There will be 3 different shows on that day, a 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. session, a 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. session, and a 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. session, all of which combine a fan convention with live wrestling matches. A correction from last week. The April 11th show at Lehman College and April 12th show at Central Islip High School were under the banner of USA Pro Wrestling promoter Frank Goodman, and not Universal Superstars of America, which is a group run by Tommy D, as had been reported. Frank Gorilla Marconi, a journeyman wrestler in the Vancouver circuit, passed away recently. Championship Wrestling of Michigan is running April 27th at St. Adalbert's Aid Society in Grand Rapids, Michigan at 3:30 p.m. If you mention the Observer, you get $1 off any ticket. ECW. WCW has made major plays for several of the wrestlers within this company over the past week. In response, Paul Heyman has either signed or extended the contracts of Shane Douglas, Francine, Eliminators Sabu, Taz, Joey Styles, the Dudleys, Stevie Richards and Tommy Dreamer all in the last few days, and will take steps to do the same by the end of the week with Sandman, the Pitbulls and Chris Candido. WCW apparently offered Raven a 3-year deal at 6 figures per to join the NWO. Raven has a meeting with Heyman later this week to discuss the situation. WCW wanted to bring him in immediately, but he's apparently under contract to ECW through August and under a non-compete clause when it comes to appearing on pay-per-view shows through October 13th. It's expected that Heyman at the very least would insist Raven stay through the August 17th pay-per-view show in order to finally put over Dreamer, and that Heyman has already contacted Kevin Sullivan to claim WCW is tampering with ECW contracts. Heyman's attorneys also contacted WCW claiming by using the terms the Extreme Team for Ace Darling and Devon Storm, who did a job on the April 14th show in Philadelphia, and by using the name Kimona, they were violating ECW intellectual property. ECW claims they've used the term the Extreme Team since August 1995. The next ECW Arena show on May 10th will be headlined by a 4-way match with Terry Funk, Raven, Stevie Richards and Sandman for the ECW title plus Taz and Chris Candido versus Sabu and Rob Van Dam. Candido is now expected to work this coming weekend in Massachusetts. They did an angle backstage at the pay-per-view where Van Dam grabbed Sonny's butt, which was to set up a Van Dam versus Candido feud, which was okayed by Vince McMahon. They are expecting a possible company record crowd on May 2nd in Asbury Park, New Jersey for their debut in a 2,000-seat building with Taz and Candido versus Sabu and Van Dam, Raven, Sandman and Richards in a 3-way with the winner getting a title shot at Funk later in the show, and Eliminators versus Dudleys, who in this case will be Devon and Big Dick. They are hopeful of Bubba Ray Dudley being back for the May 10th arena show, although with a broken ankle, that is iffy. Brian Lee's neck injury is said to be more serious than first thought. He's tentatively booked in most cities in singles matches against Shane Douglas, although those bouts are also iffy at this point. On May 3rd they return to Trenton, New Jersey at the same building they ran the last time, and run May 8th in Queens, New York and May 9th in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Some more notes regarding the pay-per-view show. Everyone pretty well acknowledges that the Douglas vs. Pitbull No. 2 match blew. Apparently Douglas is one of the few ECW wrestlers who calls his matches entirely in the ring rather than setting up every spot beforehand in the dressing room. However, since Pitbull was nervous and because of time constraints on pay-per-view, he set up the whole match in the dressing room and it didn't work. Wing Kanemura from FMW will be working the Trenton and Asbury Park shows while he's in the area with Atsushi Onita for their meeting with Titan Sports. Signed Guy Dudley, Lou D'Angeli, quit because he got a job that wouldn't allow him to make all the shows. Rob Van Dam has agreed to stay through June 15th. It is not a lock that he's leaving at that point, as Sabu is trying to talk Paul Heyman into upping his money and trying to keep him. The Raven Funk match at the pay-per-view was originally scheduled to go 20 to 25 minutes, but the show ran late. Heyman actually booked the show to end at 11:30 p.m. Eastern, figuring it would go long but give them plenty of breathing room to end to 11:55 p.m. He received word as the show was going on that request and the cable stations were going to pull the plug at 11:50 p.m. so the last match was cut to 7 minutes and they had to go off the air without really getting into a post-match celebration. Originally it was to be Reggie Bennett under the mask so that when Francine would faint from the kiss, it was actually from a woman, and it was to be Brian Lee to take the bump from Tommy Dreamer through the 3 tables. However, with Lee's neck injury, they decided to put him under the mask and turn him and use Bennett to interfere in the Funk Raven. The gimmick is that Bennett claims she's a woman that Dreamer won't be able to piledrive her and that she'll piledrive him instead. Funk is now talking about wrestling through the end of this year, at which time he expects to largely retire from the US scene. He may do a show for a big payday but won't work regularly, but continue to work Japan. Rude will continue to be part of angles here, feuding with Douglas. Big Dick Dudley, Alex Rizzo, had been out of jail for about a month and hanging around and was asked that night if he would take the bump. The original plan was for Bubba Ray and Devon to regain the tag titles on April 25th in Waltham, Massachusetts, but that will likely be changed with Bubba injured. Expect a slew of new angles to be shot on that night. Bill Alfonso claims that he didn't attend the Nitro show in Philadelphia. Al's shows this past weekend were April 18th in Downingtown, Pennsylvania before 712 and April 19th in Warwick, Pennsylvania before 671. Burt Bite Kid, Ian Harrison, from England, was there as Sabu's new assistant, replacing John P. Moore, who is no longer around. Reports are that the shows weren't good for the most part. Gangstas vs. Dudleys was said to be horrible the first night, particularly when Big Dick was brawling with Mustafa. Raven has brought in a new flunky. Balls Mahoney offered $40 and a beer to anyone who could beat him up, and Sandman came out, beat him up, and threw down the $40 and guzzled the beer. Louis Piccoli is now a heel, doing the NWO or Click sign everywhere. They did an angle the second night where he was doing the sign and Dreamer did a run-in and broke his hand. A correction from last week regarding the age of Gran Hamada. He was born on November 27, 1950, which makes him 46 years old. We reported him at 44 and Joey Styles said he was 45, info he actually got from me which was incorrect. The Michinoku 6 wrestlers and referee Ted Tanabe came over as part of a package deal costing $20,000, which included both trans and their payoffs for doing the show. ECW has house shows scheduled for May in Syracuse and Buffalo and debuts in June in Providence, Rhode Island. Over the summer, they'll be doing 3 shows most weeks. NHB. In what may be the final major NHB show in Hawaii, depending upon if the current legislation passes, Kimo beat Brian Johnston in just over 1 minute with an over and under choke on April 16 in Honolulu. Reports were that Johnston hadn't trained hard for this match and the result wasn't a surprise to insiders. Kimo remains unbeaten in his matches all over the world with the exception of his 2 UFC losses to Royce Gracie and Ken Shamrock. Dave Beneteau is out of the May 30th UFC show due to a torn meniscus. The leading candidate to replace him is Brazilian Hugo Duarte, who would actually make it a far better heavyweight tournament since Duarte is considered along with Marco Ruas to be the best of the current Brazilian heavyweights. Based on reputation, if Duarte gets the nod as the sub, he'd have to go into the tournament as the odds-on favorite. The episode of Friends that airs on May 8th features not only Tank Abbott and John McCarthy, but also promoter Bob Merowitz and Vitor Belfort. Apparently Abbott was outgoing and did really well on the set, while Belfort, who is more shy and apparently was out of his element, felt like he was being ignored and kind of stormed off the set. WCW. Complete celebrity lineup for May 18th in Charlotte has Kevin Nash and Scott Hall in 6 vs. Ric Flair and Roddy Piper and Kevin Green, Steve McMichael vs. Reggie White, Steiners vs. Conan and Hugh Morris, Medusa vs. Luna Vachon, Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Yuji Yasuhiro. Yuji Yasuhiro is a war wrestler that Mysterio Jr. has worked with before, but this may be an error by WCW as not knowing their Yujis and turn out to be Yuji Nagata. Ultimo Dragon defending the TV title against Steven Regal, Dean Malenko defending the US title against Prince Iaukea, Meng vs. Chris Benoit and Mortis vs. Glacier. On paper this doesn't look to be a good one, at least from a wrestling standpoint, as the only match which is close to guaranteed to be good is Regal Dragon. Arnold Anderson had his neck surgery on April 8th and there were some complications, including fluid in his lungs over this past week. He had a foot-long incision in his neck. Actually, his discs and vertebrae in his neck were in better shape than they thought, but the problem was along the side of his neck and they had to cut through a lot of muscle to get to the problem. During the middle of the week, a lot of the talk was that he was in really rough shape and would never return to wrestling, but the prognosis has gotten better as the week went on. He was in horrible pain much of the week but was released from the hospital on April 17th and is walking. He's going to have a very long recovery period and right now nobody can say with any certainty how long it'll be if or when he can return to the ring. Nitro on April 21st in Saginaw, Michigan before a sellout 5,484, 4,989 paying $90,703, saw Malenko keep the U.S. title beating Nagata in 6:02 with the Cloverleaf. Nagata is actually a great amateur wrestler who nearly made the Olympic team in 1992 before going pro, so of course they bill him as a martial artist and have him do almost no wrestling. It was still a good match since, unlike Nakanishi, Nagata can throw great kicks, 3 stars. Glacier beat Cyclope in 34. After the match, Brian Clark, still with no name, Vengeance may wind up being the name but it hasn't been decided, and Mortis did a run-in on Glacier and Mortis dug the spikes of his helmet into his eye. Nick Patrick did an interview wearing a WCW t-shirt asking to be reinstated. He did a great interview, but both Larry Zbyszko and Tony Schiavone were skeptical because of his past behavior. Dragon beat Bobby Eaton in a TV title match in 2:49 with a Dragon Sleeper submission. Meng beat Chris Jericho with a nerve hold submission in 3:27. This match was awful. Fans paid no attention to the match as it appeared there was a fight in the stands because everyone turned away from the match, which then fell apart with blown spots. This is a broken record, but no matter how tough Meng may be in real life, Nobody at home knows it, and no matter how hard they push him, he lacks color and never gets over. Steiners beat Public Enemy via DQ when Connon and Hugh Morris interfered in 3:13. Connon and Morris brawled with Steiners before the match. It was weird since PE joined with Steiners, so it was a 4-on-2 with the heels being outnumbered. They did an interview with J.J. Dillon, who is now the babyface head suit of WCW, to feud with Eric Bischoff. Story is that Bischoff is under contract to WCW and can't be fired but has no power. Bischoff can't telling Dillon bite me since Dillon couldn't do anything to him. Basically another heel trying to get over as a cool babyface, and they continue to make reference to Bischoff as the most powerful man in the wrestling industry in the entire world, and Dillon even said 2 years ago Stamford, Connecticut was the place, but it isn't anymore. Somehow they announced that Bagwell and Norton are still in the NWO, but that Big Bubba, who is injured, and Michael Wallstreet, must return to WCW. Don't expect logic in any of this. Jeff Jarrett beat Scotty Riggs with a figure 4 in 3:54. During the match, Steve McMichael came out with a briefcase but was stopped by Reggie White, who stole the briefcase and made him back off. Six beat Rey Mysterio Jr. to keep the cruiser belt in a very good match in 5:55 when Kevin Nash jackknifed Mysterio Jr., who did a stretcher job and was taken out in an ambulance. It was ambulance night on wrestling. They aired a Hogan video showing the crew and cast, including Robert Mann from Uncle Vaughn and Grace Jones, wearing NWO t-shirts. NWO did an interview with Nash doing his own comeback, saying Piper was one brain cell away from being in a coma and complaining that Piper and Flair took everything from the business, gave nothing back, stripped it and left it a mess for guys of his generation to put back together. He said WCW would only push sons of wrestlers when he got started, referring to Dustin Rhodes and Eric Watts, and that even though he was a little green then, that Scott Hall could have been a superstar, but they held him back and they had to go to New York. He talked about the old days of, presumably, Flair riding around in the limo and drinking the wine and chasing ugly women while Nash and company were three in a car in a rented Ford Taurus drinking cheap booze. It was one hell of an interview. Six claimed all Ric Flair was as someone who stole Buddy Rogers' nickname, gimmick and hold. Diamond Dallas Page beat Psychosis with the Diamond Cutter in 50, and they had the mic work with Randy Savage going along the same lines as every week. Show ended with Flair, Piper and Kevin Green challenging the NWO to come out. They did, including Scott Hall, and sent the B-team guys like Bagwell, Norton, Imposter, Sting, and Vincent in the ring to get destroyed. Norton didn't seem thrilled by his position and was visibly obvious how he didn't want to sell for Piper's offense. The show went off the air with the brawl continuing. Besides Nitro, the other weekend ratings saw main event at 1.2 and Saturday night at 2.2 with the Pro preempted for baseball. The Flair-Piper-Green interview on April 7th was only supposed to go 3 minutes and wound up going 9 minutes because they couldn't stop making no sense. People backstage were literally banging their heads against walls because they wouldn't stop and nobody could figure out what they were saying. The odds are that Kimono won't be hired because the feeling is the last thing the company needs is another woman who can't work. They've already got the beauty queen, the silicone-implanted tough girl, not to say the others aren't silicone-implanted, that is, the aerobic queen, and the bitch roll, so there isn't really a spot left. WCW Saturday Night for this past weekend and next week were taped on April 16th in Gainesville, Georgia before 1,150 paying $8,000. No matches of real note, although Dean Malenko beat Chavo Guerrero Jr. in a U.S. title match, Chris Jericho beat Super Calo in what was said to have been the best match on the card, Hector Guerrero was given a win, High Voltage was given a win over La Parka and Galaxy, Jim Duggan beat Alex Wright, Jim Powers got a win over Craig Pittman, Page beat Roadblock, Dragon beat Juventud Guerrera in a TV title match, Riggs pinned Jarrett with his feet on the ropes, but Jarrett beat up Riggs' two jobbers, Wright, Chavo Guerrero Jr. and Hard Body Harrison after the match, and Luger beat Meng. After doing its second straight big house in Grand Rapids, Michigan on April 19th, WCW is considering doing a pay-per-view from there later this year. WCW has upped ticket prices to its shows. In most markets they'll be charging $15 and $20, which is in line with what WWF charges. WWF had been charging significantly higher prices to its shows and thus drawing much higher grosses, and WCW wants to beat WWF in every category. This was the first weekend with the new prices, and both Saginaw and Dayton were sellouts and Grand Rapids did well. Kalamazoo was the worst of the four, but also still did well, and it's basically only about an hour drive from Grand Rapids. Actual figures were dated April 18th did $5,754 sellout and $86,496 plus another $50,000 in merchandise. Grand Rapids on April 19th did $7,624 and $126,639 and another $60,000 in merchandise, while April 20th in Kalamazoo, Michigan did $3,727 and $68,920. All the shows were headlined by Lex Luger and the Giant, winning a triangle match, beating Harlem Heat and Public Enemy Kevin Nash, pinning Diamond Dallas Page due to interference from Randy Savage. The original finish was for Page to go over like last week, but Nash changed it, plus Rey Mysterio Jr. beat Super Calo and Jarrett beat Jericho. The actual figures for April 11th in Montreal were $8,970 paid and $210,853 Canadian. There is no word about doing a return date, and both Jacques Rougeau and Carl-Pierre Ouellet haven't been back since the show. They are billing Green vs. McMichael as the first pro wrestling match ever where both participants played on Super Bowl champion football teams. To almost no fanfare, the WCW Women's Cruiserweight Tournament ended on April 7th in Huntsville, Alabama, with Toshie Uematsu winning the finals over Malia Hasaka in a match that took place before Nitro went on the air. The Women's Cruiserweight title hasn't been mentioned on Nitro or WCW Saturday nights since the first Women's Cruiser match bombed on the March 31st Nitro. Sports Illustrated ran Hulk Hogan's photo in this past week's issue as a B-level celebrity who attends NBA games of the Orlando Magic. WCW will be involved in Wrestling Legends 2 on June 6th in Buffalo, New York, to salute the late Ilio Di Paolo and have a tribute for Jim Kelly and legendary middleweight Carmen Basilio. The similar show last year set WCW records for largest crowd and gate, both of which have since been broken. Besides WCW matches, there will be a tag match with former area tag team champions Tony Parisi and Gino Brito Sr. facing Greg Valentine and Dory Funk. Also at the show will be Angelo Poffo, Dick Bayer, Waldo Von Erich, Angelo Mosca Sr., Sweet Daddy Siki, Kurt Von Hess, Johnny Powers, and Lou Thez. WWF. The May 11th pay-per-view from Richmond, Virginia will have Undertaker defending against Steve Austin, Ken Shamrock vs. Vader, Ahmed Johnson vs. Farouk and Crush and Savio Vega one at a time, and if he wins all three, they have to disband the Nation of Domination, Flash Funk vs. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, and one more match. The plan was for it to be Sid vs. Mankind, but at press time we're not sure about that match. Sid was supposed to return and do an interview on the April 21st Raw, but he wasn't there, apparently because so much was added to the show that it would have been lost in the shuffle. At press time the match was still on the schedule, but there were people in the company skeptical of whether or not it would end up taking place or not, and his future is undetermined. Sid is supposed to return on the April 28th Raw and start back on the road on May 2nd. Raw on April 21st in Binghamton, New York drew a sellout 3,846, building scaled down because of the stage, and a city record house of $67,846. The angles were great and the matches were really bad. Fortunately, the angles were really great. In matches, Sultan beat Ahmed Johnson via DQ in 4:52 when Johnson hit Sultan with the 2x4. Nation of Domination came out, but Johnson held them off with the 2x4, 1/4 of 1 star. Shamrock did an interview challenging Mike Tyson, "Don't hold your breath on that one," and talking about Vader. He came off as believable talking about Tyson, probably because he meant much of what he said. Austin and Brett had their street fight, which wasn't a match, but was great for what it was. Tiger Ali Singh debuted beating Salvatore Sincere in 4:42 with a spin kick. Singh was really green, particularly when it came to selling. Sincere did a good job of carrying him, but the crowd didn't care, 1/2 of 1 star. Rockabilly beat Jesse Jam in 8:48 with the old honky-tonk man shake, rattle and roll. Even less crowd reaction and a worse match than the night before, DUD. In due time, Rockabilly may be a good comic undercard wrestler, but right now the act is dying. Only other bout was Undertaker over Helmsley via DQ in 15:16, 1 star. Not good either as a wrestling match, particularly since it was a long match. Mankind came out with a blowtorch for the DQ. Before he could use it, Undertaker got up and knocked him out of the ring and they brawled to the back. During the match, Goldust and Marlena were at ringside out of their wrestling gimmicks, although Marlena was smoking a cigar. Jim Ross called them Dustin and Terry, Marlena, trying to let everyone know that Goldust is really Dustin Rhodes since the Goldust character isn't getting over as a face, and to set up a series of mixed tags. WWF has invested a lot of time in the feud, and the feud with the Valet should work, but the feud really hasn't gotten over. Marlena choked Chyna with some sort of a strap while Dustin and Hunter brawled. The plan right now is for Goldust to do an interview, probably next week, To either greatly change the Goldust character or get rid of the character completely and admit who he is and come up with a reason why he did the character so he can get over better as a face. Both Sultan and Henry Godwinn were hospitalized after the April 21st show. Sultan suffered fractured ribs and a swollen eye from the 2x4 shots and a kick to the face respectively and will be out of action 2 or 3 weeks, likely because Johnson was too stiff doing the spot with the 2x4. Godwinn suffered compressed vertebrae in his neck taking a bump in a later match against the Road Warriors and is expected out of action 3 weeks. Both were out of the hospital by the next morning. Pillman was also in tremendous pain after doing the angle with Austin as physically that's the most pressure he's put on the ankle thus far and he's still not 100%. Current plan is for Undertaker vs. Ahmed Johnson to headline King of the Ring, but plans that far out in this kind of environment are subject to mucho change. That would lead one to believe that Johnson will go over in some sort of a gimmicky way. I don't see them breaking up the Nation of Domination at this point, but since they are coming off so strong and saying that Johnson can't beat all three, that likely means he may. Smith will take Brett's place in the matches this coming weekend against Undertaker on top. Madison Square Garden on May 17th has Undertaker and Sid vs. Mankind and Vader, Johnson vs. Farouk, Austin and Legion of Doom vs. Bulldog and Owen and Pillman. Pillman will be back in the ring full-time in mid-May but may work a match or two before that time. Goldust vs. Helmsley, Rocky Maivia vs. Vega for the IC title, Funk vs. Rockabilly, Godwins vs. Doug Furnas and Phil LaFon, Jean vs. Sultan and Bob Holly vs. Leif Cassidy. Weekend house shows saw April 18th in Youngstown, Ohio drew $4,565 and $63,551 and April 19th in State College, Pennsylvania drew $4,246 and $70,013. Main bouts saw Maivia over Vega via DQ, Blackjacks over Furnas and LaFon, Austin pinned Owen Hart, Helmsley pinned Goldust, Johnson beat Crush and Undertaker kept the title pinning Smith. They had signs posted in both cities about Vader and Sid not being there. Weekend ratings saw Livewire at 1.1 and Superstars at 1.2. Jim Ross on his hotline acknowledged not only that the April 14th Raw was a poor show but that his own performance as an announcer was lacking. The readers' pages. Memphis Wrestling. For nearly 35 years at 3:30 p.m., 2:30 p.m., 11 a.m. and 10 a.m., I waited for and watched Memphis Wrestling. This was before the VCR days. I planned my days around it just to watch the likes of Jackie Fargo, Roy Lee Welch, the Von Brauners, the Interns, Rowdy Red Roberts, Treach Phillips, Don and Al Green, and the list goes on and on. I loved in the 70s watching Tommy Gilbert, Eddie Marlin, Jerry Jarrett, Mephisto, and Dante, the Spoilers and many of the others along with my personal favorite Phil Hickerson. The early and mid-80s were also good and I struggled through the late 80s. But since 1986, except for 1995 and early 1996, Memphis Wrestling has steadily gone downward. The only bright spots were when Randy Hales was booker during 1995 to 1996. He made it interesting, especially with the Smoky Mountain vs. USWA feud. Now that period was good. My point today is the reason Memphis lasted longer than all the other regional promotions was because it wasn't pretty. It was blood and guts and guys giving 100%. They didn't need fancy signs nor mirrored ring entrance, or a beautiful girl trying to show off her legs that Jerry Lawler is in love with. They didn't need ass shots of a lady called Queenie. They didn't need a bow-tied geek doing ring announcing to 75 people like he was announcing for 8,000 fans like in the good old days. We didn't need fancy tarps around the ring, or the USWA logo on the announcers' mics. All we needed and wanted was Memphis Wrestling. Brooms, garbage cans, boards, baseball bats, juice, chains, chairs, ring posts. Real cage matches were all the standard here. Not anymore. Now we've got fancy pretty wrestling that you can see 22 other hours of every week on television. We threw out the old and brought in the new. It's nice to see Lance Russell back, but he and Dutch Mantel aren't he and Dave Brown. Dave Brown was a good announcer and had become an excellent announcer after Lance left. Corey Macklin had made improvements that others only wish they could have made. Randy West was the inventor of the wrestling music video, which put Stan Lane and Steve Kieran on the map. All are gone. Jerry Jarrett is gone. Granted, he starved almost everyone to death, but he survived and most of the good ones who came through here are making great money today in the WWF and WCW. At least they learned how to work, with the exception of Hulk Hogan, who is beyond help. PG-13, who along with Miss Texas and Brian Christopher, who carried this territory with Tommy Rich and Doug Gilbert for the past several years, are all gone except for Christopher. Christopher, the only good worker left here, will probably leave soon for WWF. What does that leave us here? Out of business. The people running the company have forgotten what got them this far and kept them in business. It was some talent and a lot of excitement. Now we have no talent and no excitement. That also spells out of business shortly. Channel 5 is getting a lot of complaints about today's product. And they should, because it's embarrassing. It makes us longtime fans hang our heads. I don't know what they need to do or if it can even be done, but if I were Jerry Lawler, I would beg Dave Brown, Corey Macklin, and especially Randy Hales to come back and be man enough to admit the company made some big mistakes. It was a lot better just 2 years ago, and it's really, really bad today. I guess Nitro and Raw will have to fulfill my wrestling needs, unless Memphis Wrestling wakes up from this horrible nightmare. Daryl Bruff. Huron, Tennessee. ECW. Now that everyone is sitting back and basking in the glow of ECW success in the pay-per-view arena, I thought it was time to pay homage to the person who is really responsible for ECW, and that is Todd Gordon. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to minimize the work and creativity of Paul Heyman, who has proven to be a brilliant and gutsy booker and is no small part responsible for ECW's success, but it seems like the man most responsible for it all is being forgotten when the accolades are given out. ECW rose from the ashes of Joel Goodhart's Tri-State Wrestling Alliance. Gordon had invested a sizable sum of money in the TWA. After Goodhart absconded with the money, he left Gordon holding the bag. He could have spent his time whining and hiring lawyers to punish Goodhart, but he instead took what was left of TWA and tried to turn it into something. He took the now unemployed wrestlers of the TWA and gave some complete newcomers, myself being one of them, a chance. With zero experience in the wrestling business and some help from more experienced wrestlers, Gordon began running shows. He ran at the now defunct Philadelphia Sports Bar, the Chestnut Cabaret, the Aztec Club, and nearly anywhere he could find a building that would hold an audience. He created all of the angles and storylines, and after the first show, did all the booking. On most of those shows the audiences were sparse and Gordon lost money. Like a man, he took the losses and always paid the performers what they were promised, unlike most other promoters who would rather cheat their own mothers rather than lose a dime themselves. Even for sold shows, Gordon would sometimes lose money rather than disappoint the audience. If the sponsor couldn't afford to pay for big names, Gordon might book a Jim Neidhart or a Terry Taylor just so the audience would get to see a good show, even if it cost him his profit. As ECW started to do better, Gordon decided it was time to give television a shot and enter the next phase. Although his favorite part of the promotion was the booking, he swallowed his ego and brought in Eddie Gilbert as the booker, because he had the experience and the background in producing television that Gordon lacked. I'm sure this wasn't an easy decision for him to make because it meant he'd be giving up his favorite part of the business in order to do what was best for the promotion and fans. It was Gilbert and Gordon who started the shirt to a more hardcore product. When Gilbert left and Heyman took over, he went all the way. Many in the business, both promoters and wrestlers, thought Gordon would be crazy to work with Heyman, that the people wouldn't accept it, and that all he built would go down the drain. He turned a deaf ear to his critics, put his faith in the booker, risked his money and his reputation, and went all the way. If it wasn't for Gordon's willingness to risk his own money, his persistence in the face of overwhelming odds, his desire to give the fans what they want even at his own financial expense, ECW would be just another independent promotion that quietly died. People like Stevie Richards, Sandman Dean Malenko, Taz, and many others would be largely unknown. I'd like to thank Gordon for starting me in this business and giving me many opportunities I may otherwise have never had. I wish him many years of continued success and growth, and I hope that he gets immense pleasure out of watching those who put the mouth on him in the early days eat crow. Robin Hunt. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. April 28, 1997. This is the end of this program. See you next time, Wrestling